Major Anya Sharma's arrival at Forward Operating Base Kestrel was an event of profound inconsequence. It registered on the base's personnel charts as a line of text, and in the minds of the Marines who saw her step off the Osprey as a flicker of bureaucratic annoyance. Her uniform, a standard Marine Corps combat utility uniform, seemed to hang on her with the stiff unfamiliarity of a costume. The flag on her sleeve was the only mark of distinction, and in this sea of identical patches, it made her anonymous. They cut that flag from her sleeve later, a final act of dismissal, only to find the silent, black truth hidden beneath. But that moment of revelation was yet to come, simmering under the oppressive sun of a forgotten valley. For now, she was just another officer from headquarters, a problem of paperwork and billeting, her presence as thin and unwelcome as the dust that coated everything. ####1. Arrival and dismissal. The air at FOB Kestrel tasted of grit and diesel. It was a taste Anya Sharma had become accustomed to over a career spent in places erased from official maps. As she walked across the gravel toward the command tent, the crunch of her boots was the only sound that seemed to belong to her. The stares of the Marines she passed were not hostile, but worse, dismissive. They saw a major, a rank that demanded a baseline of respect, but her frame was leaner than that of a typical infantry officer, and she carried herself with a stillness that they mistook for hesitancy. They saw a woman sent from the rear to fill a quota, to inspect clipboards and inventories, to be a nuisance until her tour was up. Her reporting officer was a young, earnest corporal named Evans, whose face was a roadmap of sunburn and confusion. He fumbled with her orders, his eyes scanning the heavily redacted file. "Major Sharma, reporting for duty, ma'am. Your assignment is operational readiness and integrated logistics." He read the words as if they were a foreign language. "Right. Welcome to Kestrel, ma'am. The CO is Colonel Madsen. He'll want to see you." The whispers followed her to the mess tent. "Logistics? They're sending us majors for logistics now," one voice muttered. "Probably here to count the damn MREs," another added with a cynical laugh. Anya sat alone, eating mechanically, her focus not on the bland food but on the patterns of the base. She observed the flow of personnel, the shift changes at the guard towers, the slight sag in the concertina wire near the western perimeter. She noted the way the afternoon sun cast a long shadow from the communications tower, creating a potential blind spot for the sentries. She saw the weary slump in the shoulders of the Marines returning from patrol, the subtle signs of fatigue that preceded mistakes. She cataloged it all, filed it away in a mental archive built over years of seeing what others missed. Her skills were a language she no longer spoke aloud. She simply observed, and in her silence, she understood. The base was a system, and like any system, it had flaws. And flaws were her specialty. ###2. The Colonel's contempt. Colonel Madsen's office was an island of rigid order in the chaos of the FOB. His desk was a polished expanse of dark wood. His awards were aligned with geometric precision, and the air smelled of stale coffee and authority. He did not rise when Anya entered. He gestured to a chair with a flick of his wrist, his eyes remaining fixed on her personnel file. "Major Sharma," he began, the title sounding like an accusation. He closed the folder with a soft thud that echoed in the small room. "Your file is sparse. Lots of black ink. But the part 1 can read says, logistics. The part 1 can read says you've been attached to commands in places that haven't seen conflict in 20 years. So tell me, Major, why in God's name did Central Command send me a REMF paper pusher when I asked for a field-grade combat officer? REMF, rear echelon motherfucker." The insult was as old as the Corps itself, a blunt instrument designed to wound. Anya's expression didn't flicker. "I go where I'm assigned, Colonel." "You do?" Madsen agreed, a smirk playing on his lips. "And you're assigned to me. I have men out there every day, walking through valleys where ghosts carry rifles. I have patrols hitting IEDs. I have a command post to run. What I don't have is time to find busy work for an officer who, by all accounts, has never had a single grain of this country's sand in her boots." His condescension was a physical weight in the room. He saw her as a puzzle piece that didn't fit, an administrative error made flesh. He picked up a clipboard. So, here's your first assignment. We have a backlog of communications gear in Storage Unit 7. Old radios, spare parts, junk. Nobody's done a proper inventory in years. I want every single item cataloged, cross-referenced, and filed. In triplicate. That should keep you out of my way for a while. It was a punishment assignment, a clear and deliberate message. He was sending her to a dusty cage filled with forgotten things, exiling her from the heart of the base. Anya stood, her posture unwavering. There was no anger in her eyes, only a quiet acceptance that seemed to irritate the colonel more than any protest would have. "Understood, sir," she said, her voice even. She took the clipboard from his desk. Her fingers brushed his, and he recoiled slightly, as if from a static charge. For a fleeting second, he saw something in her gaze. A depth, a hardness, that didn't align with the redacted file or the bureaucratic job title. But the moment passed, and she was just a major in a slightly too large uniform, walking out of his office and toward the most useless corner of his base. ####3. Cataloging the forgotten. Storage Unit 7 was exactly as Madsen had described it, a tomb of obsolete technology. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light from a bare bulb, illuminating stacks of metal cases, tangled nests of coaxial cables, and the ghostly shapes of decommissioned radio racks. The air was thick with the smell of old ozone and decay. Corporal Evans, tasked with assisting her, stood in the doorway with an air of profound apology. "Sorry about this, ma'am," he said. "The colonel, he gets set in his ways." "It's a necessary task, Corporal," Anya replied, her voice echoing slightly in the metal container. She didn't seem to view it as a punishment. To her, it was simply a problem to be solved. She set the clipboard down and began to work, her movements economical and precise. Evans expected her to direct, to point, and tell him what to lift. Instead, she knelt and unlatched a heavy Pelican case herself. Inside, nestled in foam, were a dozen and /PRC-117 radios, predecessors to the current models. The other Marines would have seen them as junk, fit only for scrap. Anya saw something else. She lifted one out, her fingers running over the casing with a practiced familiarity. She checked the battery housing, cleaned the contacts with a cloth from her pocket, and examined the antenna port. For hours they worked in a strange, shared silence. Evans moved boxes while Anya assessed their contents. She wasn't just counting. She was diagnosing. She tested power cells that had been written off as dead, finding that a few still held a residual charge. She untangled a web of wires, her hands moving with the deftness of a weaver, identifying each cable by touch and texture. Her focus was absolute. It was in these small, methodical actions that Evans began to see the woman the colonel had missed. He noticed the faint, silver web of scars on her forearms, visible only when she rolled up her sleeves in the stuffy heat. He saw the calluses on her palms, hard-earned and incongruous with the profile of a desk jockey. In a dusty corner, beneath a pile of torn camouflage netting, she found what she seemed to be searching for. A set of 3 older, heavy-duty SATCOM units. They were bulky, antiquated, and coated in a thick layer of grime. The inventory sheet listed them as non-operational, pending disposal. "Help me with these, Corporal," she said, her voice carrying a new note of intensity. They hauled the units into the light. While Evans wiped away the years of dust, Anya opened an access panel and began to work on the internal components. She used a multi-tool from her pocket with the precision of a surgeon, cleaning terminals, reseating circuit boards, and rerouting power conduits. She didn't consult a manual. The knowledge was ingrained in her hands. "What are these things, ma'am?" Evans asked, mesmerized by her efficiency. "An older model of encrypted satellite radio," she explained, not looking up. "They operate on a different set of frequencies than the new gear. Slower, less bandwidth. But they're rugged, and they draw power from almost any source." She found a stripped wire and began to mend it. "And most importantly," she added, her voice dropping slightly, The encryption keys are hard-coded. They can't be wiped remotely. They're self-contained. By the end of the day, she had not just inventoried the storage unit. She had assessed its potential. She had found forgotten tools and, with quiet, methodical patience, had sharpened them. Corporal Evans left that evening with a new and unsettling thought. Maybe the colonel hadn't exiled Major Sharma to the most useless part of the base. Maybe he had just sent her to her armory. ####4. Pressure descends. The change came first as a whisper on the wind. The sky on the horizon, a brilliant, unforgiving blue for weeks, began to curdle, turning a bruised shade of yellow-brown. The seasoned Marines knew the sign. A haboob. The daily weather forecast had predicted moderate winds. Nothing more. But the desert did not read forecasts. The storm hit with the force of a physical blow. A wall of sand, thousands of feet high, slammed into FOB Kestrel, plunging the world into a roaring, sepia-toned twilight. Visibility dropped to zero. The wind howled like a predator, tearing at tents and rattling the metal walls of the command post. Inside the Tactical Operations Center, controlled chaos was rapidly bleeding into genuine panic. "Comms are down. I've lost the repeater on Hill 405. A sergeant shouted over the din. "Main tower is offline. I think it took a lightning strike," another voice called out. Colonel Madsen stood in the center of the room, his face a mask of grim frustration. He barked orders, but they were futile gestures against the storm's fury. "Get me a line to regional command. Reroute through the backup array. Now!" "Negative, sir. The backup is down too. The storm is creating too much atmospheric interference. We're getting nothing but static across all channels." The FOB was an island cut off from the world. They were blind, deaf, and alone. The digital maps flickered, their data feeds severed. The steady, reassuring rhythm of radio chatter was replaced by an unnerving electronic hiss. In that moment, the sophisticated, multi-million-dollar nerve center of the base was reduced to a useless box of blinking lights. Madsen's authority, built on his connection to the chain of command, was suddenly gone. He was just a man in a metal room, shouting into a dead microphone. Anya Sharma entered the TOC as if walking through the eye of the storm. She had been in her small quarters, monitoring the barometric pressure with a watch that seemed far more advanced than its simple analog face suggested. She had felt the pressure drop long before the alarm sounded. She moved through the frantic technicians with a calm that was both unnerving and magnetic. The panicked energy in the room seemed to part around her. She didn't wait to be acknowledged. Her voice cut through the noise, not loud, but clear and sharp. "Colonel, main and backup comms are compromised. We have approximately 10 minutes before the storm's ionic charge degrades the short-range channels. After that, we won't even be able to talk between buildings." Madsen turned, his face flushed with anger and stress. He was about to order her out, to demand what a logistics officer thought she was doing in his TOC during a crisis. But the certainty in her voice, the utter lack of panic in her eyes, stopped him. She wasn't offering an opinion. She was stating a tactical reality. For the first time, he saw her not as a problem, but as someone who was seeing the board more clearly than he was. The pressure that was breaking his men seemed to be focusing her. ####5.
Efficient intervention.
"Get out of my TOC, Major," Madsen started to say, but the words died in his throat. The sheer, unshakable confidence radiating from Anya silenced him. She ignored his aborted command and turned to the senior communications sergeant. "Sergeant, give me primary access to the auxiliary power grid. I need a dedicated, isolated circuit to the east wall panel. Now." The sergeant looked from her to the colonel, confused. "Do it?" Madsen grunted, the words tasting like ash. He didn't know why he said it, but inaction was no longer an option. Anya then keyed her personal radio, using a short-range channel that was already degrading. "Evans, bring the PEL 80 cases from Storage 7 to the TOC. On the double." A minute later, Corporal Evans burst through the door, hauling the 3 heavy SATCOM units she had resurrected. The comms techs stared at the antiquated equipment as if it were a museum exhibit. "What the hell is that junk?" one of them muttered. Anya didn't reply. She worked with a fluid grace that defied the bulky equipment. She plugged a power cable into the dedicated circuit the sergeant had prepared. She unspooled a length of thick coaxial cable and, using a magnetic clamp, attached a small, flat antenna to the metal wall of the TOC. Pointing it upward at a precise angle she seemed to calculate from memory. Her hands moved with an intimate knowledge of the machinery, connecting ports, flipping switches in a sequence that was clearly long practiced. She powered on the first unit. The screen glowed with a faint green, pixelated text. It looked ancient compared to the sleek LCD displays around it. She put on a headset, her fingers flying across the keypad, inputting a long string of alphanumeric code. The comms techs watched, their expressions shifting from scorn to disbelief. She wasn't just operating the radio. She was communing with it. She was manually inputting transmission protocols, bypassing automated handshake procedures, and forcing a connection through sheer will and technical mastery. The TOC was silent, save for the roar of the wind outside and the soft clicking of the keypad under Anya's fingers. A low-frequency hum emanated from the machine. Then, a series of sharp beeps, the electronic signature of a successful satellite link. Anya's posture relaxed a fraction of an inch. She spoke into the headset, her voice calm and measured. "Kestrel Actual to Recom Alpha. Do you copy? Over?" A burst of static answered. Anya adjusted a dial, her eyes closed for a moment in concentration. She was listening not just to the sound, but to the silence between the sounds, searching for a signal in the noise. "Recom Alpha, this is Kestrel Actual. We are broadcasting on secure channel Sierra Delta 9er. Acknowledge. Over." More static, then a faint, distorted voice broke through the storm. "Kes, I'll read you." Faint but clear. "Status, over." The entire room held its breath. They had a link. It was a thread, tenuous and fragile, but it was a connection to the outside world. Anya turned to Colonel Madsen, pulling off the headset. Her face was impassive. "Sir, we have a stable, encrypted link to regional command. Bandwidth is minimal, voice and text only. I'm transmitting our situational report now." She hadn't asked for permission. She had seen a problem, bypassed the broken system, and implemented a solution. In the space of 5 minutes, the logistics officer from the Dusty Storage Unit had become the most effective person in the room. ####6. Shifting perceptions. When the haboob finally passed hours later, it left behind a world scrubbed clean and unervingly silent. The air in the TOC was still thick with tension, but it was a different kind now. It was the tension of reassessment, of shattered assumptions. The comms technicians circled the old SATCOM unit with a kind of reverence, speaking in hushed tones about frequency algorithms and encryption protocols they'd only read about in textbooks. Colonel Madsen stood by the main communications console, where his team was now working to repair the primary tower, using the schematics Anya had downloaded for them over her fragile connection. He watched her as she methodically packed the old radio away, her movements as deliberate and neat as they had been when she'd set it up. He walked over to her, his boots loud on the metal floor. The arrogance was gone from his posture, replaced by a wary, grudging curiosity. "Major," he began, his voice rough. "That was impressive. Where in the hell did you learn to do that?" Anya latched the final Pelican case, the click echoing in the quiet room. She met his gaze directly. "It was part of a previous assignment, sir." The answer was a wall, polite but impenetrable. She offered no further explanation. Madsen knew a dismissal when he heard one. He had dismissed her, and now she was returning the favor, not with insolence, but with a quiet refusal to satisfy his curiosity. He had wanted to keep her out of his way. Now he desperately wanted to know what way she had come from. The whispers on the base changed. The story of the desk jockey, who had single-handedly re-established communication during the worst storm in a decade, spread like wildfire. Marines who had sneered at her in the mess hall now fell silent when she walked past. They watched her with a mixture of awe and suspicion. Corporal Evans became a minor celebrity, pestered with questions he couldn't answer. "I don't know, man," he'd say, shaking his head. She just knew. She knew what to do. The whole time, she was the calmest 1 inch. The perception of her shifted from an object of scorn to a subject of intense speculation. Who was this woman? Where did that redacted file lead? She was no longer just Major Sharma, the logistics officer. She was an enigma. The quiet woman who had been sent to count spare parts had saved them from isolation, and no one, least of all Colonel Madsen, knew how. He would look at her across the dusty FOB, and the question would burn in his mind. Who are you? ####7. The second test. 2 days later, the second test arrived, not from the sky, but from the valleys. A long-range recon patrol, call sign Bravo 2, had been tracking insurgent movement in the treacherous Tarak Pass. The flash floods that followed the Haboob had turned the dry riverbeds into raging torrents, trapping the 6-man team on a high ridge. Worse, their route of retreat was cut off by an enemy force that had them pinned down. Bravo 2 Actual. This is Kestrel Actual. How copy? Madsen's voice was strained in the TOC. The patrol leader's reply was a clipped, frantic burst of static-laced words. Lid copy Actual. Taking radic fire from Th sides of the canyon. Our DIO is damaged battery to call. Requesting immediate support. They're being jammed, the comms sergeant announced, stating the obvious. It's sophisticated. They're not just flooding the channel. They're using frequency-hopping jammers that mirror our own patterns. We can't get a lock. They were flying blind. They couldn't call in an airstrike without precise coordinates, and risking a quick reaction force for the rescue would be sending them into a well-laid trap. The lives of 6 Marines hung on their ability to break through the electronic warfare. Every attempt they made was met with a screech of jamming signals. Madsen slammed his fist on the console. He was losing men and he was powerless. His eyes scanned the room and landed on Anya, who was standing quietly at the edge of the room, observing a topographical map on a secondary screen. This time he did not hesitate. The last vestiges of his pride crumbled in the face of the crisis. "Major," he called out, his voice cutting through the tense room. Everyone turned to look. It was not a request. It was a plea. "Can you get them a line?" Anya walked to the main console. She didn't look at the radio. She looked at the spectrum analyzer, a screen showing a chaotic waterfall of colored signal data. To everyone else, it was noise. To her, it was a language. She watched the enemy's jamming signals dance across the frequencies, a predatory, calculated pattern designed to anticipate and counter their every move. "They're good," she murmured almost to herself. "They're using a predictive algorithm. But it's not perfect. It has to leave gaps to reset its cycle." Her eyes narrowed, tracking a ghost in the machine. "There," she said, pointing to a nearly invisible sliver on the screen. "There's a window, 0.03 seconds, every 14 seconds, on the 405 MHz band. It's not enough for voice, but it might be enough for a data burst." The comms sergeant stared at her. "Ma'am, that's a 1 in a million shot. The timing would have to be perfect." "Then we'll have to be perfect," Anya replied coolly. She turned to the technician. "Set up a compressed data packet containing a GPS location request. Key it to my mark. We'll have one chance." She put on a headset, her eyes fixed on the spectrum analyzer's cascade. She listened, her body perfectly still. She was timing the rhythm of the enemy's electronic warfare, waiting for the infinitesimal pause, the single dropped beat in the song of chaos. "Stand by," she said, her voice low. The room was utterly silent. "Stand by. Mark." The technician hit the transmit key. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a single, lonely ping appeared on the main tactical map, a blue dot representing Bravo 2's position. It glowed for a second before the jamming smothered it again. But it was enough. Anya was already moving to the topographical map, her mind working faster than the computer's. She overlaid the GPS ping with the terrain data. They're trapped here on this spur. Her finger traced the ridge. The enemy fire is coming from both sides. But given the acoustics of the canyon, the shots are echoing, making the force sound larger than it is. They aren't on both sides. They're using the terrain. They're firing from concealed positions. Here, she circled a cave system. And here, she marked a rocky outcrop overlooking the ridge. That gives them overlapping fields of fire and makes them sound like a platoon instead of a squad. Madsen stared at her analysis. It was brilliant, swift, and deadly. He grabbed a radio. Get me the gunships. I have 2 targets for them. Danger close. The rescue was a textbook operation. The air support neutralized the 2 enemy positions with pinpoint accuracy. The QRF moved in under cover of the attack and extracted Bravo 2 without a single casualty. When the patrol leader's voice, clear and strong, finally came over the radio announcing they were safe, a wave of relief washed through the TOC. In the middle of it all stood Anya Sharma, already wiping the map clean, her work done. She had not just found the lost patrol. She had dissected the enemy's strategy from a single pulse of data. The enigma had become a legend. ###8. The reveal. Respect on a forward operating base is a currency earned in moments of crisis. In the 2 days since the rescue of Bravo 2, Major Sharma's stock had soared. The Marines no longer saw a quota filler. They saw a quiet professional whose competence was both baffling and undeniable. They gave her a wide berth, their deference mixed with a healthy dose of fear. Who was this woman who could bend technology to her will and read a battlefield from a single blip on a screen? The question lingered in the dusty air, unanswered. The answer came not in the heat of battle, but in the mundane setting of the evening mess hall. It came at the hands of Lieutenant Harris, a young, ambitious officer fresh from Quantico. Harris was a man who confused regulations with leadership. He saw the world in black and white, and Major Sharma's growing, unspoken authority was a shade of gray he could not tolerate. He saw her worn, dusty uniform and the American flag patch on her right sleeve, its edges frayed and peeling from wear, as a personal affront to his sense of military order. He chose his moment when the mess hall was full. He strode up to the table where Anya was sitting alone, his posture ramrod straight. "Major," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "your uniform is a disgrace to this corps. Per Marine Corps Order P102034G, the flag insignia must be kept in a clean and serviceable condition." Anya slowly looked up from her meal, her eyes calm, betraying no emotion. "I'm aware of the regulation, Lieutenant." "Clearly you are not," Harris pressed on, emboldened by her lack of reaction. He saw it as weakness. "That patch is tattered and disrespectful. It's a symbol of the nation we serve. You will replace it immediately." He was playing to the crowd, trying to reassert the formal hierarchy that Anya's quiet competence had begun to upend. Before Anya could respond, he made a fatal error in judgment. He reached out, his fingers pinching the corner of the worn flag patch. "In fact, I'll do it for you." With a sharp, tearing sound, he ripped the Velcro-backed flag from her sleeve. The sound silenced the entire mess hall. Every eye was fixed on the 2 of them. Harris held the tattered flag aloft for a moment, a triumphant glint in his eye, but his triumph dissolved into stunned confusion. His gaze dropped to her sleeve, to the space where the flag had been. It wasn't empty. Sewn directly into the fabric of her uniform, perfectly centered where the flag had been, was another patch. It was solid black, made of a non-reflective material that seemed to absorb the light. There was no color, no writing, but ghosted into the black fabric, visible only when the light caught it just right, was a subtle, terrifying insignia. A stylized phantom, its form comprised of a dagger and a lightning bolt. A wave of shock rippled through the room. Most of the junior Marines didn't know what it was, but they knew it was something they weren't supposed to see. It radiated a cold, lethal authority that made the official ranks on their collars seem like children's toys. Corporal Evans, sitting a few tables away, felt the blood drain from his face. He'd seen that insignia once before, in a top-secret threat identification brief about a unit so classified it was officially denied to exist. A Tier 1 Special Mission Unit. The tip of the spear's tip. The people they sent when nations needed to be toppled or terrorists needed to vanish from the face of the earth. At that exact moment, Colonel Madsen walked into the mess hall, his eyes landing on the scene. He saw the lieutenant holding the flag, he saw Anya's exposed sleeve, and he froze. His face went pale. Every redacted line in her file, every moment of inexplicable skill, every calm, calculated action suddenly snapped into horrifying focus. The integrated logistics title wasn't a job. It was a cover story of almost insulting simplicity. He hadn't been sent a paper pusher. He'd been sent a ghost. ####9. A salute of respect. The silence in the mess hall was absolute, thick with the weight of revelation. Lieutenant Harris stood frozen, the tattered flag still clutched in his hand, his face a mask of dawning horror. He was beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake. The black patch on Anya's sleeve was like a black hole, drawing in all the light and sound in the room. Colonel Madsen moved. He walked not with the leisurely pace of a commander, but with the grim, determined stride of a man trying to contain a disaster. He didn't stop at Harris. He walked right past him, his focus entirely on Anya. He looked from the ghosted insignia on her arm to her face. Her expression was unchanged, her eyes as calm and steady as ever, but for the first time, he saw the immense weight of the secrets she carried behind them. He saw the ghost. He turned slowly, his whole body rigid with fury, to face the young lieutenant. His voice, when it came, was not a shout. It was far worse. It was a low, venomous whisper that cut through the silence like a razor. "Lieutenant Harris," Madsen said, his eyes burning with cold fire, "go to your quarters. Pack your personal belongings. You will report to my office at 0600 hours tomorrow morning in your service alphas. You will be lucky, incredibly lucky, if you are still a member of my United States Marine Corps by sunrise." He didn't wait for a reply. "Get out." Harris, pale and trembling, dropped the flag onto the table, turned, and practically fled from the room. Madsen watched him go, then turned back to Anya. The entire population of FOB Kestrel in that room was watching, waiting to see what he would do. An apology would be inadequate, an order would be absurd. The chasm of experience and authority that separated them had been laid bare. He, a colonel in charge of a forward operating base, was in the presence of someone who operated on a global, strategic level he could only guess at. So he did the only thing he could. He stood before her table, straightened his back, and brought his heels together with a sharp crack. He raised his hand to his brow and rendered a slow, deliberate salute. It was not the perfunctory salute of a superior officer. It was the salute of a soldier to a warrior. It was a gesture of profound, unconditional, and deeply earned respect. Anya Sharma looked at him for a long moment. Then, she stood, her movements fluid and crisp, and returned the salute. Her form was perfect, a study in disciplined grace. The spell was broken. At a table near the back, Corporal Evans pushed his chair back and rose to his feet. He too rendered a sharp salute. Then the calm sergeant who had watched her work miracles stood. Then 2 lance corporals from Bravo 2, their lives saved by her skill. Within seconds, a wave of motion swept the room. One by one, every Marine in the mess hall rose to their feet, their chairs scraping against the concrete floor, and saluted the quiet major with the black patch on her sleeve. It was a silent, thunderous ovation of respect, a recognition of the truth that had been hidden in plain sight all along. ####10. Closure in stitches. Later that night, the FOB was quiet. The generators hummed their constant, low song, and the stars shone with a fierce, cold clarity in the desert sky. Anya Sharma stood alone at the western perimeter, looking out into the vast, dark emptiness beyond the concertina wire. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of cool sand. In her hands, she held a new American flag patch and a small sewing kit. She had not asked for the new patch. It had simply appeared on her cot, left there by some anonymous Marine. It was a silent offering, an apology, and a promise. Under the dim glow of a security light, she began to stitch the patch onto her sleeve. Her movements were as precise and methodical as they had been when she was repairing the satellite radio. Each stitch was perfectly spaced, each pass of the needle sure and steady. She was carefully placing the symbol of her nation back where it belonged, covering the ghost, hiding the black truth once more beneath the red, white, and blue. The cover was being restored. The operator was disappearing back into the uniform. A pair of boots crunched on the gravel behind her. She didn't turn. "Ma'am," a quiet voice said. It was Corporal Evans. He was holding 2 steaming mugs. "Figured you might be cold. It's coffee." "Sort of." Anya paused her stitching and turned to him, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching the corner of her mouth. "Thank you, Corporal." She took one of the mugs, its warmth seeping into her hands. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, 2 soldiers at the edge of the world. The lights of the comms tower she had saved blinked rhythmically in the distance, a steady heartbeat in the darkness. The respect she had earned was now a tangible part of the atmosphere of the base, as real as the dust and the diesel. It wasn't loud or boastful. It was a quiet, constant hum, just beneath the surface. Evans finally spoke, his voice low. "What you did for Bravo 2, and during the storm." "Thank you, ma'am." "Just doing my job, Corporal," she replied softly, her gaze returning to the desert. He nodded, understanding that her definition of job was worlds away from his own. He finished his coffee, gave her a respectful nod, and left her to her solitude. Anya took another sip of the bitter coffee, then set the mug down and picked up her needle and thread. Her hands, calloused and scarred, capable of both mending a wire and ending a life, finished the last stitch. The flag was secure. The ghost was hidden. She was Major Anya Sharma, operational readiness and integrated logistics. The patch didn't define her. The uniform didn't define her. The respect was not for the insignia they had seen, but for the competence they had witnessed. Her value was not in the secrets she kept, but in the results she delivered. And in the quiet dignity of the desert night, that was more than enough.